My name is Clotilda Vance, and I am 77 years old. These hands, gnarled and scarred, have picked more cotton than I could ever count. These eyes have seen horrors that would break most souls. But I am still here, and this is my story. A story I must tell before my time on this earth comes to an end. It was a sweltering August morning in 1863, 2 years before everything would change, when Master Jeremiah Caldwell spoke those words to me. "You will never be free again, Clotilda." His voice cut through the humid Alabama air like the crack of his overseer's whip. I stood before him in the main house, my legs trembling not from fear, but from fury I had learned to bury deep inside my chest. I had been his property for 54 years. 54 years since I was torn from my mother's arms at the Charleston slave market when I was just a child of 9. I still remember her screams, how they echoed off the auction block, how they haunt me in the quiet moments before sleep finds me. Master Caldwell had purchased me for his cotton plantation, a sprawling estate of misery where hundreds of us toiled under the merciless southern sun. That morning, I had made a simple request to visit my daughter Sarah on the neighboring plantation where she had been sold 5 years prior. Sarah was all I had left in this world. My 2 sons had been sold away when they were teenagers, scattered like seeds in the wind to plantations I would never know. But Sarah was close, just 3 miles down the dirt road, and I had not seen her face in 8 months. Master Caldwell's response was immediate and cruel. "That girl is not yours anymore, Clotilda. She belongs to another man now. You belong to me. You will work until your body gives out, and then you will die here, on my land, just like all the others." The dining room where we stood was opulent, filled with furniture built by enslaved hands, decorated with cotton grown by enslaved backs, maintained by enslaved labor. I had scrubbed every inch of those floors, polished every piece of silver, cooked every meal that passed through his lips. At 77, I had become too old for the fields, so they had moved me to the house, where I served his table and cleaned his chambers. "Master Caldwell," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I have served you faithfully for over 50 years. I am asking only for one afternoon." "Silence!" He slammed his fist on the mahogany table, making the fine china rattle. "You dare make demands of me? You forget your place, old woman. Perhaps a few hours in the root cellar will remind you of what you are." The root cellar was a punishment reserved for those who showed defiance. It was a dank, dark hole beneath the kitchen house, barely large enough to stand in, where rats scurried across your feet and the air was so thick and foul it burned your lungs. I had been thrown down there many times over the decades, for talking back, for moving too slowly, for existing in ways that displeased the white people who owned me. But that day, something inside me shifted. As 2 house servants grabbed my arms to drag me toward my punishment, I looked into Master Caldwell's pale blue eyes and saw something I had never noticed before: fear. Beneath all his bluster and cruelty, beneath the power he wielded over our bodies and lives, there was a trembling, desperate fear. The war was not going well for the Confederacy. Word had spread through the plantation in whispers. Lincoln's army was advancing, and with them came the possibility of freedom. Master Caldwell was afraid of losing everything: his wealth, his status, his control over us. And in that moment, I realized that his fear could become my weapon. They locked me in the cellar for 3 days. 3 days with no food, only a tin cup of water brought down once each morning. 3 days in darkness, so complete I could not see my own hands in front of my face. 3 days to think, to plan, to let the anger that had simmered for 54 years finally come to a full boil. On the 3rd day, when they pulled me out, weak and disoriented, I did not resist. I returned to my duties without complaint, scrubbing floors, preparing meals, emptying chamber pots. But everything had changed. I began to watch, to listen, to pay attention to things I had trained myself to ignore for decades. I noticed how Master Caldwell kept a small pistol in his desk drawer, how he drank heavily every evening after dinner, how he walked the same path to the barn each night to check on his horses. I noticed which floorboards creaked, which doors had loose hinges, which windows could be opened without sound. I noticed everything because I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that my time for action was coming. The other enslaved people on the plantation had begun to change too. There was electricity in the air, a current of hope mixed with terror. Freedom was no longer an impossible dream, but a real possibility approaching with each passing day. Some talked of running, of making their way north to Union lines. Others spoke of what they would do when liberation came, how they would walk off these cursed fields and never look back. But I had different plans. I had no intention of simply walking away. Master Caldwell had stolen my entire life, had separated me from everyone I loved, had worked me until my body was broken and scarred. He had promised me that I would never be free, that I would die in his chains. I intended to prove him wrong, but not in the way he could ever imagine. As I lay on my thin mattress in the slave quarters that night, surrounded by the sounds of others sleeping fitfully, I whispered a promise to myself and to all those who had suffered under his hand. Justice was coming, and it would wear the face of an old woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. September brought cooler winds to Alabama, but the tension on the Caldwell plantation only intensified. News from the war filtered through in fragments. Overheard conversations between Master Caldwell and his visitors, whispered reports from enslaved people who had contact with neighboring plantations. Occasional newspapers left carelessly on tables that I learned to read in stolen glances. The Confederacy was crumbling. Sherman's army was cutting through Georgia like a knife through butter, and the Union forces were pressing from multiple directions. Master Caldwell's demeanor grew increasingly volatile. Some days he would rage through the house, striking anyone within reach. Other days, he locked himself in his study with his whiskey, emerging only to eat or sleep. His wife had died 3 years prior, and his 2 sons were fighting somewhere in Virginia. The plantation was managed by Nathaniel Burke, an overseer whose cruelty had earned him a reputation, even among men known for brutality. But even Burke seemed uncertain now, his usual swagger replaced with a nervous energy that made him more dangerous than ever. I continued my work with quiet diligence, but every action was now calculated. I had begun to collect small items, a length of rope from the barn, a key copied in wax from the master's ring while he slept off his nightly drinking, a knife from the kitchen that no one had noticed missing. I hid these treasures beneath the loose floorboard under my mattress, adding to my collection piece by piece. The other house servants noticed the change in me. Clara, who worked in the laundry, pulled me aside one morning while we were drawing water from the well. She was 30 years younger than me, but had been on the plantation since birth. Her dark eyes searched my face with concern. "Miss Clotilda, you got to be careful," she whispered, glancing around to ensure we were alone. "Master's been watching you. He told Burke yesterday that you've been acting peculiar." I squeezed her hand gently. "I am always careful, child. I have survived this long by knowing when to bend and when to stand firm. But what you planning?" Her voice trembled. "I can see it in your eyes. You planning something that could get us all killed." I looked at this young woman, born into bondage, who had known nothing but servitude her entire life. "Freedom is coming, Clara. Can you feel it in the air? Can you taste it when the wind blows from the north?" "Freedom might come," she replied, "but that don't mean we'll live to see it. Master Caldwell would burn this whole plantation down before he'd let us walk away free." She was right, of course. I had heard the conversations, the plans some masters were making. Some spoke of sending their enslaved people deeper south, away from advancing Union lines. Others talked darkly of more permanent solutions, unwilling to lose their property to emancipation. Master Caldwell had remained tight-lipped about his intentions, but I knew the man well enough after 54 years. He would not let go easily. That afternoon, while cleaning his study, I found the document. It was partially hidden beneath a stack of ledgers, written in his distinctive scrawling hand. It was a letter to a slave trader in Mobile, inquiring about the possibility of quickly selling 20 enslaved people, the youngest and strongest workers, before Union forces could reach the area. My name was not on the list. I was too old to fetch a good price. But Sarah's name was there. My daughter, my only remaining child, was to be sold away to the Deep South, possibly Texas or Louisiana, where slavery might persist even if the Confederacy fell. The paper trembled in my weathered hands. All the careful planning, all the patient waiting. It meant nothing if Sarah was torn from me again. I had already lost so much. I could not lose her too, not when freedom was so close we could almost touch it. That evening, as I served dinner to Master Caldwell and Burke, I studied them both with new intensity. Caldwell sat at the head of the table, his face flushed with whiskey, his movements slow and imprecise. Burke sat to his right, shoveling food into his mouth with the manners of a pig at a trough. Neither man saw me as a threat. To them, I was just an old enslaved woman worn down by decades of servitude, no more dangerous than the furniture in the room. Their blindness would be their downfall. "Clotilda," Master Caldwell said suddenly, making me jump slightly. "You have been here longer than anyone, longer than my own father owned this land. Do you remember when you first arrived?" The question caught me off guard. In all these years, he had never asked me anything about my past, my memories, my life before his family owned me. I was a tool to him, nothing more. "Yes, master, I remember. And have I not treated you fairly? Fed you, clothed you, given you work befitting your age?" I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of his words. Fairly? As if there was any fairness in owning another human being. As if the scraps of food and threadbare clothes were gifts rather than the bare minimum needed to keep his property functioning. "Yes, master," I said, because it was the only safe answer. "Then you understand loyalty, don't you? When the Yankees come, if they come, you will remember who has cared for you all these years. You will not be swayed by their false promises of freedom." I kept my eyes downcast, my voice humble. "I understand, master. But what I understood was this. Time was running out. If I was going to act, it had to be soon, before Sarah was sold, before the war ended one way or another, before age or illness or Master Caldwell's paranoia ended my life on this cursed ground. That night, I knelt beside my mattress and pulled out my collection of gathered items. The rope, the copied key, the knife, and a small bottle of laudanum I had carefully accumulated drop by drop from the medicine cabinet over weeks. I arranged them carefully, checking each one, preparing for what had to come next. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. Inside, my heart beat steady and strong, no longer burdened by fear, but driven by purpose. The old woman who had accepted her chains was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone dangerous, someone ready to rewrite the ending of her own story. The opportunity came on a Saturday night in late September. Master Caldwell had dismissed Burke early after a disagreement about the cotton yield, and he sat alone in his study, working through his second bottle of whiskey. I could hear him muttering to himself as I moved through the house, extinguishing lamps and preparing the rooms for night. The other house servants had retired to the quarters. Clara had looked at me strangely before leaving, as if she wanted to say something but could not find the words. I squeezed her shoulder gently and told her to sleep well. I meant it sincerely. Whatever happened this night, I wanted the others to have the distance of ignorance to protect them. By 10 o'clock, the big house was silent except for Master Caldwell's movements in his study. I waited in the kitchen, sitting perfectly still in the darkness, listening to every sound. I had learned patience in the hardest school imaginable. 54 years of forced servitude teaches you to wait, to watch, to choose your moment with exquisite care. At 11:30, I heard what I had been waiting for. The heavy thud of his body slumping in his chair, followed by the deep, rattling snores of a man who had drunk himself into unconsciousness. I waited 10 more minutes to be certain, then rose from my chair and moved through the house like a shadow. In my apron pocket, I carried the bottle of laudanum I had collected. In my other pocket, the copied key and the knife. The rope I had already positioned earlier that day in the root cellar, hidden beneath old burlap sacks where no one would notice it. Master Caldwell was exactly as I had pictured him. Slumped over his desk, one arm dangling, his mouth open, the stench of whiskey radiating from him like a cloud. The lamp beside him still burned, casting long shadows across the room. For a moment, I simply stood there, looking at this man who had controlled every aspect of my existence for more than half a century. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing. Without his voice to command, without his eyes to intimidate, he was just an aging white man who had built his wealth on the broken backs of people he refused to see as human. Fear touched my heart for just a moment. What I was about to do would change everything, could end in my death if I failed. But then I remembered Sarah's name on that list, remembered my sons torn from my arms, remembered every degradation and cruelty of 54 years. Fear dissolved, replaced by cold determination. I moved quickly and efficiently. First, I added a generous dose of laudanum to the whiskey bottle, ensuring he would remain deeply unconscious for hours. Then I checked the hallway, confirming the house remained silent and empty. Finally, I returned to his side and whispered in his ear, though he could not hear me, "You said I would never be free. Tonight, we will see who wears the chains." Getting him down to the root cellar was the hardest part. Master Caldwell was a large man, and I was a 77-year-old woman whose body bore the scars of decades of brutal labor. But desperation and determination can lend strength that defies physical limitations. I dragged him from his chair, letting him fall heavily to the floor. Then, inch by inch, I pulled him through the house toward the back entrance. Twice I had to stop and rest, my heart pounding so hard I feared it might burst from my chest. Sweat poured down my face despite the cool night air. My back screamed in protest, but I could not stop. Not now. Not when I was so close. The distance from the study to the root cellar was perhaps 50 yards, but it felt like miles. By the time I maneuvered his unconscious body to the edge of the cellar door, my hands were shaking and my breath came in ragged gasps. The hardest part remained, getting him down the narrow wooden steps into the darkness below. I let gravity do most of the work, guiding his body as it tumbled down the stairs with a series of sickening thuds. He groaned once but did not wake, the laudanum keeping him suspended in deep unconsciousness. I descended carefully after him, carrying the lamp to light my way. The root cellar smelled of damp earth and decay, exactly as I remembered from my own punishments down here. How many hours had I spent in this darkness? How many times had I been thrown down these steps for the crime of being human, of having feelings and desires beyond servitude? Now it was his turn. I worked quickly, using the rope I had hidden to bind his wrists and ankles. The chains came next, the very same iron chains that had been used to bind enslaved people when they first arrived at the plantation. Chains that hung on hooks in the cellar wall like trophies of oppression. I had been locked in these chains myself on several occasions. I knew their weight, their cold bite against skin, the way they made you feel less than human. I wrapped them around his body, securing them with the heavy padlock I had taken from the barn. The key to this lock now rested at the bottom of the well, dropped there an hour before I began this night's work. Even if he somehow escaped the ropes, the chains would hold him. As I worked, Master Caldwell began to stir, the effects of the laudanum starting to wear off despite the dose I had given him. His eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his features as he tried to understand where he was and what was happening. What is this?" His voice was thick and slurred. "Clotilda, what have you done?" I stood before him, this man who had owned me for 54 years, and for the first time in my life, I spoke to him not as a slave to a master, but as one human being to another. "You told me I would never be free," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You promised I would die in your chains. But you were wrong, Master Caldwell. Tonight, everything changes. Tonight, you will learn what it means to be bound, to be helpless, to be at the mercy of another." His eyes widened as understanding dawned. He struggled against the ropes and chains, but I had tied them well. 54 years of watching, learning, surviving had taught me many things, including how to secure a man so he could not escape. "You cannot do this," he shouted, rage replacing confusion. "Do you know what will happen to you? They will hang you. They will make an example of you." I smiled then, a cold smile that held no warmth. "Perhaps, but you will not be there to see it." I did not leave immediately. Instead, I pulled up an old crate and sat down, the lamp casting dancing shadows on the earthen walls of the cellar. Master Caldwell continued to struggle against his bonds, his face growing red with exertion and fury. But the ropes held firm, and the chains, those terrible chains, remained locked tight around his body. "You have lost your mind, old woman," he spat at me. "When Burke comes in the morning, he will kill you for this. He will make it slow. Is that what you want? To die screaming? Burke will not come in the morning, I replied calmly. Tomorrow is Sunday. You gave him the weekend off, remember? He will not return until Monday afternoon, and by then, much will have changed. I watched fear flicker across his face as he calculated the implications. 2 full days alone, bound in this cellar, with no one knowing where he was. The house servants would assume he had left early for town or was sleeping off his drinking. No one would think to search the root cellar. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice taking on a wheedling tone I had never heard before. "Money? I can give you money. Freedom papers? I will write them tonight. You can go north, start a new life. Just release me, and we can forget this madness." Forget? The word tasted bitter on my tongue. How does one forget 54 years of bondage? How does one forget watching their children sold away like cattle? You ask me to forget what cannot be forgotten, to forgive what cannot be forgiven. "I treated you well," he insisted. "Better than most masters treat their slaves. You were never beaten without cause. Never—" "Without cause?" I interrupted, my voice rising for the first time. "Tell me, Master Caldwell, what cause justifies beating another human being? What cause justifies separating a mother from her children? What cause justifies owning another person's life, their body, their very existence?" He stared at me, and I could see him truly looking at me for perhaps the first time in 5 decades. Not as property, not as a servant, but as a human being with thoughts and feelings and a soul as valid as his own. "I did what the law allowed," he said finally, weakly. "I did what every other plantation owner did. I was not cruel by nature. I was simply a man of my time." "A man of your time," I repeated. "And what time was that, Master Caldwell? A time when it was acceptable to treat human beings like animals? A time when cruelty and oppression were disguised as economic necessity? You hide behind your time, behind your society's rules, but evil is evil regardless of how many people participate in it." I stood and began to pace the small space of the cellar, the lamp in my hand creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. Master Caldwell watched me warily, perhaps realizing that his usual weapons, intimidation, authority, violence, were useless here in the darkness. "Let me tell you a story," I said. "Let me tell you about a 9-year-old girl who stood on an auction block in Charleston, South Carolina. She was small for her age, terrified, crying for her mother who was being dragged away to a different buyer. The auctioneer called her healthy stock, good breeding potential. Men examined her teeth like she was a horse. They discussed her value as if she were furniture. My voice remained steady, though the memories burned like fresh wounds. Your father bought that girl. He brought her here to this plantation and put her to work in the fields. By the time she was 12, her hands were calloused and bleeding. By 15, she had her first child, my first son, Jacob. Do you remember Jacob, Master Caldwell?" He said nothing, but I saw recognition in his eyes. "Of course you remember. You sold him when he was 17 to a plantation in Mississippi. He had tried to learn to read, you see, had gotten his hands on a Bible and was teaching himself letters. That was his crime. That was why you sold my firstborn son to a man known for working his slaves to death in the cotton fields." "It was the law," he began, but I cut him off. "The law, always the law. The law said I was 3/5 of a person. The law said you could own me. The law said you could separate families, could beat us, could work us until our bodies broke. Tell me, Master Caldwell, when the law is unjust, when the law is evil, what is the moral man supposed to do? Follow it blindly or recognize it for the abomination it is?" I returned to my crate and sat down, suddenly exhausted. The weight of decades pressed down on me, the accumulated pain of a lifetime lived in bondage. Master Caldwell watched me with something that might have been the beginning of understanding, though I suspected it was merely fear dressed in more palatable clothing. "My daughter Sarah is to be sold," I said quietly. "I found the papers. You were going to sell her south before the Union Army arrives. She is the only child I have left, the only connection to a family that was systematically destroyed by you and men like you. I could not let that happen. I would die before I let you take her from me again." "The sale was not finalized," he said quickly. "I can cancel it. I can keep Sarah here. I can—" "You can do nothing," I interrupted. "Your time of making decisions about our lives is over. Tomorrow, I will walk off this plantation. I will take Sarah, and we will make our way to the Union lines. We will claim the freedom that should have been ours from birth. And you will remain here, in these chains, experiencing a tiny fraction of the imprisonment you have inflicted on hundreds of people over your lifetime. They will catch you, he said desperately. The patrollers, the slave catchers. You will never make it to Union lines. And when they bring you back, the punishment will be worse than anything you can imagine. I smiled at him again, that cold smile. Perhaps, but I will die free, Master Caldwell. I will die knowing I tried. That is more than you can say. You will die here, in darkness, bound by the same chains you used to bind others. And when they find you, if they find you, the story will spread. The story of an old enslaved woman who chained her master in his own cellar. They will tell that story in whispers for generations. I stood and picked up the lamp. I will return once more before I leave, to bring you water. Not out of kindness, but because I am not the monster you trained me to be. I will not let you die of thirst, though you deserve far worse than that mercy. But after tomorrow, you will be alone with your chains and your memories. Think on your life, Master Caldwell. Think on what you have done and the suffering you have caused. Think on it in the darkness, the way we have thought on our stolen lives, our lost children, our destroyed families. I turned toward the stairs, leaving him in near total darkness as I took the lamp with me. "Clotilda!" he shouted after me, his voice cracking with panic. "Clotilda, please! You cannot leave me here! Clotilda!" His shouts followed me up the stairs, but I did not look back. I closed the cellar door firmly, sliding the heavy wooden bar into place. His muffled cries continued, but they grew fainter as I walked back to the house, back to the room where Clara and the others slept peacefully, unaware of what I had done. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the small window in the quarters, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the chains of 54 years beginning to fall away from my soul. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Caldwell plantation. I rose before the others, washed my face in the basin, and dressed in my best clothes, a simple cotton dress that had been mended countless times but was clean and pressed. Today would be the first day of my freedom, and I intended to meet it with dignity. Clara found me in the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast. Her eyes were red and swollen, and I realized she had been crying. She grabbed my arm urgently. "Miss Clotilda, Burke was here last night asking for Master Caldwell. He came back early. He is looking for you." My heart seized for a moment, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I had not seen the master since yesterday evening, that I assumed he had retired early. But Miss Clotilda, Burke is suspicious. He is searching the grounds. It is only a matter of time before he finds him," I finished. "I know. I expected this might happen. I had hoped for more time, had hoped to reach Sarah and begin our journey north before the alarm was raised. But Burke's early return had complicated matters. I would have to move quickly now, would have to improvise in ways I had not planned." "What have you done?" Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Miss Clotilda, what have you done?" I took her hands in mine, looking into her frightened eyes. "I have done what had to be done. I have taken back a piece of what was stolen from me. And now I'm going to walk away from this place and never return. They will kill you, perhaps, but I will die free. And Clara, listen to me carefully. The Union Army is close. Within weeks, maybe days, they will be here. When they come, tell them everything. Tell them about Master Caldwell in the cellar. Tell them about all of us, about this place. Can you do that for me?" She nodded, squeezing my hands tightly. "I will. I promise I will." I embraced her quickly, then gathered a small bundle of food and a blanket. In my pocket, I carried the knife and what little money I had managed to save over the years. Coins dropped and forgotten by white folks, small payments for extra work. It amounted to less than $5, but it was mine. The walk to the neighboring plantation where Sarah lived took an hour. I moved quickly along the dirt road, my old bones protesting, but my will driving me forward. Every sound made me jump. Was that hoofbeats behind me? Were those voices calling out? But the road remained empty, the morning peaceful. The Henderson plantation was smaller than Caldwell's, but no less oppressive. I knew the layout from previous visits. knew where the enslaved workers' quarters were located. I found Sarah outside, drawing water from the well, and the sight of her face nearly undid me. She was 46 years old now, her hair touched with gray, her body bent from years of field work. But when she saw me, her face lit up with joy and surprise. "Mama, what are you doing here? Does Master Caldwell know you?" "We are leaving," I said urgently, cutting off her questions. "Right now. We are walking away from here and never coming back." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mama, we cannot just leave. They will catch us. They will—" "Sarah, listen to me." I gripped her shoulders, looking intently into her eyes. "I have spent 54 years in bondage. I have watched my children sold away, have endured more pain and suffering than any person should bear. I will not spend my last years, however many I have left, as someone's property. The Union Army is coming. Freedom is coming. And I intend to meet it halfway, not wait for it to find me chained to this cursed land." I could see the war within her, the trained obedience of a lifetime of enslavement fighting against the desperate desire for freedom. Finally, she nodded slowly. "What about the others? My friends here, the people I have lived with. Tell them to be ready. Tell them freedom is coming soon. But we cannot wait, you and I. We must leave now before they realize what I have done." We did not take much. Sarah had even less than I did. Within minutes, we were walking north along the road, two black women in simple dresses carrying small bundles heading toward an uncertain future. The first hours passed without incident. We walked steadily, avoiding the main roads when possible, cutting through fields and forests. The September sun climbed higher, warming the air. My legs ached terribly, and I knew Sarah was suffering too. But we did not stop except for brief moments to catch our breath and drink from streams. By afternoon, we heard riders behind us. The slave catchers had been unleashed. We hid in a thick copse of trees, hardly daring to breathe as 3 men on horseback thundered past, their dogs straining at leashes, noses to the ground. "They are looking for us," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "They are looking for everyone," I replied. "With the war so close to being lost, every master in Alabama is worried about their property running. We are just 2 among hundreds trying to reach freedom." As evening approached, we encountered other runaways, a family of 5 from a plantation 20 miles south, a young man who had escaped 3 days prior and knew the route to Union lines. We joined together, finding strength in numbers, sharing food and information. An elderly man named Thomas, who had been free but was captured and illegally re-enslaved 2 years ago, became our guide. He knew the roads, knew where sympathetic people might offer help, knew how to read the stars to navigate north. "It is about 30 miles to the Union camp," he told us that first night as we rested in an abandoned barn. 3 days of walking if we are careful and lucky. But the patrollers are out in force. We will need to be smart and stay hidden during daylight. That night, huddled together for warmth, Sarah asked me the question I knew was coming. "Mama, what did you do? What happened with Master Caldwell?" I told her everything. The chains, the cellar, the words we had exchanged in the darkness. She listened in silence, her eyes growing wider with each detail. "You could be hanged for this," she finally whispered. "I know, but Sarah, I spent my whole life being afraid. Afraid of the whip, afraid of being sold, afraid of punishment for the smallest act of humanity. I am 77 years old. I am tired of being afraid. Whatever happens now, I have taken back a piece of my dignity. I have shown that we are not passive victims, that we have power, that we can fight back against those who oppress us." She took my hand in the darkness. "I am proud of you, Mama. Scared, but proud." We left before dawn, moving through the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts. The journey north had truly begun. Our group of runaways grew as we traveled north. By the 3rd day, we were 15 people, men, women, and children, all moving toward the promise of Union lines and freedom. Thomas led us along hidden paths, through swamps and forests, avoiding towns and main roads where patrollers would be watching. The journey was brutal. My body, already worn by 77 years of hard labor, protested every step. My feet bled in my worn shoes. My back ached from sleeping on the ground. But every painful step was a step toward freedom, and that knowledge drove me forward. Sarah stayed close to me, often supporting my weight when the terrain grew difficult. She was my strength when my body threatened to fail, and I was her courage when fear made her want to turn back. We sustained each other in ways that went beyond the physical, 2 generations bound by love and shared suffering. On the 4th day, we heard gunfire in the distance. Thomas raised his hand, and we all froze, listening intently. The sound came from the north, artillery fire, the boom of cannons, the crack of rifles. The war had found us, or we had found it. Union forces are engaging Confederate troops about 5 miles ahead, Thomas said, his ear cocked toward the sound. This could be our opportunity or our greatest danger. We must be very careful now. We moved forward cautiously, stopping frequently to listen and assess. The sounds of battle grew louder and smoke began to appear on the horizon. Some in our group wanted to turn back, to find another route, but Thomas shook his head. There is no other safe route. Every road south is crawling with Confederate patrols now. Our only hope is to reach Union lines. We keep moving forward. As we crested a hill, we saw them. 2 armies engaged in brutal combat across an open field. The Confederate forces wore their gray uniforms, the Union soldiers their blue. Men fell on both sides, the violence shocking even to those of us who had witnessed the violence of slavery our entire lives. But Thomas pointed to the left flank, where Union forces had pushed forward, establishing a defensive position near a small church. There, that is where we need to go. Stay low, move quietly, and pray. The next hour was the most terrifying of my life. We crawled through brush and tall grass, working our way around the edge of the battlefield. Bullets whistled overhead. Artillery shells exploded in the distance, showering dirt and debris. One of the children in our group began to cry, and her mother desperately tried to muffle the sound. We were perhaps 200 yards from Union lines when Confederate soldiers spotted us. 5 men on horseback, led by an officer whose uniform identified him as a captain, rode toward our position. "Halt! Those are escaped slaves!" the captain shouted. "Apprehend them!" We had nowhere to run. 15 exhausted runaways, most elderly or very young, facing armed soldiers on horseback. This was the moment I had known might come, the moment when our desperate bid for freedom could end in capture or death. But then something remarkable happened. From the Union position, a company of black soldiers, the famous colored troops, emerged and positioned themselves between us and the Confederate riders. Their commanding officer, a white lieutenant, raised his hand. "Those people are under the protection of the United States Army," he called out. "Stand down and withdraw, or we will open fire." The Confederate captain hesitated, assessing the situation. He was outnumbered and outgunned, his forces fully engaged with the main battle. With a curse, he wheeled his horse and galloped away, his men following. The black soldiers escorted us to their position, where we collapsed in exhaustion and relief. I fell to my knees, my body finally giving out. 54 years of bondage and 5 days of desperate flight catching up with me all at once. Sarah knelt beside me, her arms around my shoulders, both of us weeping. "You are safe now," the lieutenant said gently, crouching beside us. "You are under Union protection. You are free." Free. The word sounded strange, impossible, miraculous. I looked up at this young white officer, at the black soldiers who stood guard around us, at the American flag flying above the church, and I began to sob, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place so deep inside me I had not known it existed. The lieutenant organized food and water for us, medical attention for those who needed it. One of the black soldiers, a man about Sarah's age, sat down beside me. "Ma'am, you are the oldest person I have seen make it to our lines," he said respectfully. "How far did you come?" 5 days walking, I replied, my voice hoarse. "But really, I have been coming toward this moment for 54 years. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "What will you do now?" It was a question I had not allowed myself to consider during our desperate flight. What came after freedom? Where would we go? How would we live? For so long, my entire existence had been dictated by others. Now, suddenly, impossibly, the future was mine to decide. "I will live," I said finally. "I will watch my daughter grow old in freedom." I will speak the truth about what was done to us. I will bear witness. Over the next weeks, as the Union Army advanced and the Confederacy crumbled, the truth about Master Caldwell emerged. Burke had found him in the root cellar on that Monday, 2 days after I chained him there. He survived, though the experience had broken something in him. The story spread through Alabama and beyond. The enslaved woman who had chained her master in his own cellar before escaping to freedom. Some called me a criminal, others called me a hero. I was neither. I was simply a woman who had endured the unendurable and finally said enough. Master Caldwell never recovered his plantation. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery in December 1865, and the world he had known, the world built on the backs of enslaved people, collapsed. I heard he died bitter and alone in 1867, still raging against the loss of his property. I felt no satisfaction at his death, but no sorrow either. He was simply irrelevant now, a relic of an evil era finally ending. Sarah and I settled in Tennessee, where we found work and built a small life for ourselves. The years of bondage had taken their toll on my body, and I knew my time was limited, but every day of freedom was a gift beyond measure. Now, at 77, I sit on the porch of our small cabin and watch the sun set over land that no longer holds us in bondage. Sarah sits beside me, her hand in mine, and we speak of the future, her future, the future of her children and grandchildren who will never know the chains that bound us. The scars remain. The memories will never fade. The pain of stolen years and lost loved ones is a wound that cannot fully heal. But I am free. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, I am free. And that, in the end, is everything. I tell this story not for sympathy or for revenge, but for truth. Future generations must know what happened here, in this land that proclaimed liberty while practicing slavery. They must know the price of freedom, the cost of justice, the human toll of oppression. My name is Clotilda Vance. I was enslaved for 54 years. I survived. I resisted. I won my freedom. And no one can ever take that from me again.